Welcome to the Elements of Success podcast with Johnny Dawson. This is the show that will inspire you to uncover your formula for success so you take charge of your story, overcome life's obstacles, and find fulfillment in all branches of life. With Johnny as your guide, you will break down the science of success and experiment with how you can combine key elements to uncover discipline you need to accelerate your journey towards prosperity. Now, on to today's episode.
Welcome to Elements of Success podcast, where we will explore specific traits that break down barriers between you and success. We will achieve this by bringing on guests so they can share their stories of success. Today, we're joined by my co-host, Eric Johnson, and CEO of Pelotonia, Doug Ulman. Doug, thank you for being on today. It is truly an honor and a pleasure to have you on the Elements of Success. And thank you so much for your willingness just to join us, share some of your successes, your stories. And for our listeners today, Doug's the CEO of Pelotonia, which is the largest cycling event in the country for cancer research. And in fact, I just looked up this number this week because I'm always interested, and I love that you guys put this on the website in big, bold letters. And it's a running tally of how much money that Pelotonia has generated. And we are up to currently $218,416,986, all towards cancer research here in Columbus and Ohio. And it is truly remarkable of the amount of just people that you guys reach on a daily basis. Not only the people, but the stories that come from those, from what you're doing on a regular basis as well is truly remarkable. And thank you for being a part of this and coming on with us today. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. And kind of the backstory on how Doug and I originally met. It was just a true testimony of networking, I think, and the stars aligned perfectly. So back in 2017, Columbus Business First, I was nominated for a 40 Under 40 award. And I ended up winning the award, and Doug had handwritten me a note card and mailed it to my office at that time and was congratulating me and encouraged me to do big things in the community and et cetera. And I kind of followed up from him and I said, you know, I love who you are and what you do in the community. Can we grab coffee? And I met with Doug at that time headquartered Pelotonia downtown, and we had coffee, and he shared some great insights and encouraged me as a young adult at that time to ride in Pelotonia, and I did. And I rode 100 miles that year, which was probably the hardest thing I've done since the Marine Corps. And it is a lot of mental just fortitude to get through that grueling last 30, 40 miles up in what we would call the rolling hills of Ohio. And that's kind of how Doug and I met. And when Doug and I were talking about this episode coming up, and I texted him and emailed him and said, Doug, you know, what word would you pick? And he immediately said community. And the definition of a community is a unified body of individuals, such as people of common interests living in a particular area. And I have thought a lot about this, and I honestly couldn't think of a better person in defining community as an element of success than Doug. And I want to ask you first, you know, that element of community, why does that resonate so much with you and who you are and what you've built?
Yeah, you know, this has always been probably the defining word for my life. And part of that comes from where I grew up, but I grew up in a town that was the first planned community in America. It was the first planned city from scratch, where a developer bought all this farmland and from scratch built a city. Mapped out exactly what it was going to be, what the neighborhoods were going to be like, and he built it over decades. And it was built on this notion that you would live in proximity to people that were different than you. Mm-hmm. And so every neighborhood had townhouses, apartments, single family homes. Every neighborhood had a community pool. You actually weren't allowed to have a pool in your backyard because they wanted people to go gather together. They didn't want people to be in the backyard. They wanted to be in the community. Every neighborhood had a school. Every neighborhood had a little shopping center. And, you know, as a kid, you think that's normal. You just think, well, that's just life because that's all you know. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until I got older and realized that I had learned so much about building community by living in that environment. And so it's just sort of been with me for my whole life. And I appreciate it more today than I did back then.
Absolutely. And, it's community is, I think, is such an important part of our everyday life that what we find in this world today is there's too much of just animosity and tension because we don't try to parallel our communities together. And it's probably very unique that you grew up in that manner, because you already had this idea of equals and a community rallying around each other, no matter what the differences might have been. So that explains a lot on why you picked this word. And one of the reoccurring themes when defining community that I saw was the social aspect of defining community. And thinking about social media in general today, how do you feel social media has kind of changed the scope of our communities around the world?
Look, social media platforms have in some ways democratized community building. And, one of the things I always think a lot about is this notion that communities are not always mutually exclusive, right? But in the sort of political dialogue or other types of sort of mainstream media, sometimes you see these sort of divisions where it's like, well, you're in that community, you can't be in this community. But one of the things that social media platforms have done is allowed people to come and go and engage in a new way. And so it's reduced a lot of the barriers to entry, where I can join any number of communities and I can feel like I'm actually in touch with people who I may never have met physically. They might live halfway around the world or halfway around the country, but yet I feel a connection to them. And I think it's human nature that people want to be connected.
Yes.
And that connection doesn't have to involve technology, but technology has increased the opportunity for those connections. Not all of them good, as we've seen, but it's democratized it in a way that you can meet anyone, you can reach out to anyone, you can connect with anyone, and there's no barrier to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you kind of nailed it there, that social media has given us the opportunity to experience other communities and to kind of open our mindset to being a little more caring and giving and charismatic and empathetic, to where a large part of that, I think, is missed. That opportunity is missed to understand different communities, different walks of lives. As you know, kind of a little bit about my story growing up in a very small rural part of Kentucky, et cetera. I mean, that was one community. And if you didn't travel outside of those mountains, you didn't experience another community. And I feel like we can sometimes as humans get trapped in our own mindset of what community means to us without trying to bridge the gap of understanding outside communities at the same time. And I think you've really kind of tapped into that a little bit, to where a lot of people believe that social media is a bad thing. And honestly, it sometimes can lead to tension between communities, a group of people. But how do you feel, or how do you believe that we can leverage social media for a greater good? So what do you think are some strategies that we could lean more towards that?
Yeah, well, first, what I would say to your earlier point is any tool in the wrong hands can be negative.
Right.
So, that's just comes with the territory. But again, I think it just opens up unbelievable opportunity. I'll give you an example from our space. So I've been my whole career in the nonprofit space. Right. So typically, most nonprofits do not have unlimited resources. Right. And so if you think about a nonprofit 20 years ago, a nonprofit would be sending out newsletters in the mail. Okay. And they'd be getting volunteers around a table. I remember my parents doing this for various organizations they were involved in, and people would staple them and fold them and put the addresses on them and put the postage on them and send them out. Well, when these new platforms came about a decade ago, and maybe a little bit more, it allowed organizations like the ones I've been associated with to say, wait a minute, if you're interested, just sign up here, just follow us, just be a part of this. And it allows us in real time to communicate and get feedback from the community that we're aiming to serve. And so it's just created an efficiency in a way where people can self-select and say, hey, I want to be on your Facebook page. I want to be on your Instagram feed. I want to be on your Twitter feed. Like, I'm signing up to be a part of something bigger than myself. And so it's changed the way we do business. It's changed the way we market. It's changed the way we communicate. And the vast majority of that has been overwhelmingly positive.
Absolutely.
And it's created one-off relationships.
Right.
I mean, I have so many people who I meet who say, gosh, I met because of a post I saw that told me the story of this person. And then I reached out to them and now we're friends.
Right.
You know, and so it isn't that it doesn't all stay online.
Right.
It can go back and forth between the digital and the real world.
That's what, you saying that. So today, you may not realize this, and I don't think Eric realizes it either, but today is 6 months ago to the day today when Bora had her brain operation. 6 months today. And her story kind of went viral and that sort of thing on TikTok and other, but Wexner Center now introduces her to people who are either struggling with rehab or fearful of going through this brain surgery operation. And that is a good thing that we've leveraged social media, because at first we didn't want to share her story, but we leveraged it in a good way. And now she's encouraging other people, and it's a tangible common good to encourage inspire others. And she's almost created her own little community of folks with brain tumors that are going through the surgery. So to your point, like you said, social media can be a very bad tool if you allow it to in your own mind. Right. And I think that's a lot of the thing that's missing today is we're all in control of our own thoughts and actions, and people don't realize that you have the ability and opportunity to do something great if you just focus your mind towards that instead of looking at the bad that's in everything. And when you go through adversities, and speaking of adversity, when defining your success, you've experienced, I would feel, probably a lack of community once upon a time in your life. And just knowing your history and your story, I think that was probably your initial diagnosis of cancer. And when you went through that, and I believe you were 19, is that correct? Do you believe that back then, when you created almost your own community with the Ulman Foundation, did that allow you to be able to lead and create an even larger community that you're impacting today from that adversity and experience? Yeah,
absolutely. And first of all, congratulations to Bora on 6 months.
Incredible.
And I think your story about her journey shows also this notion that, like, there are micro communities, right? So there's so many aspects of this. As you were telling that story, I was thinking to myself that, through this pandemic, one of the things that's been remarkable is technology, right? And my parents, who FaceTime us all the time and interact with our kids all the time, oftentimes my mom will say to our kids, "Oh, I heard about what's going on at school." And our kids are like, "What do you mean?" And she's like, "Well, I'm on the elementary school Facebook page. Right. I see all the updates," right? Like, that couldn't have happened 10 years ago.
Right.
We would have had to call every day and say, "Oh, this is what's going on at the school. This is what," So there's like this beauty in that. But yeah, look, when I was diagnosed, what I realized over a period of months was that I had unbelievable family. I was playing soccer, I had unbelievable teammates, unbelievable classmates. Like, I had all these communities, but what I didn't have was a community that understood exactly what I was going through. Right. And so I had, like, everything you could think you would need to experience that journey in as positive a way as you could. But what was missing was that new community. It's like, who can I talk to, right? Just like Bora's experiencing now. Yeah. People that are calling her and saying, what is it like? What can I expect week 1 post-surgery? Right. What can I expect a month out? And again, that was a micro community, but it didn't exist. And I was totally naive, and I probably couldn't have articulated that at the time. But what I knew was somebody had to create that community. Right. And again, this is before social media, before these technological advancements. So it was a lot different the way we approached it at the time. But that's my sort of, I guess, mantra going forward for people is be involved in tons of different communities. Right. Right. Like your hometown, right? You can't stay within just one. Right. You can be in that community and be in 12 others and sort of engage and learn and listen And I just think that's part of human nature. I mean, Pelotonia is a great example.
Right.
And you know this, most people do not sign up for Pelotonia because they like to ride a bike.
Right.
They may start to ride a bike as a result,
Mm-hmm.
but they sign up because they want to be with their colleagues, their community members,
Yep.
or they have a family member who's been treated, or God forbid, they've lost a family member, but then they say, wait a minute, how could I not do this again? This is a community.
Right.
This makes me feel good.
Once you're in it, you're in it. Like it's funny because once you're in a group and you ride in a group and you like those micro communities that you're referring to, you don't want to let them down, because it almost becomes a bond of we're getting ready to accomplish this goal. And oh, by the way, it's for an excellent cause and we're about to raise a ton of money to do it. And it's that buy-in to the community. And the only way to really have buy-in in the community is, you've already mentioned it, you have to feel as if you're a part of it. And you personally and Pelotonia has really done an excellent job of making people feel as if they are included into a larger community than themselves. And Boris surgery, she kind of adapted to or kind of hung on to this. It was a Facebook group that was just for acoustic neuromas, that one particular tumor, and there's thousands and thousands and thousands of people in this Facebook group, but she would go in there and ask a question, or I'm feeling this, and they would respond immediately and say, oh, I felt that too, it went away. And that community really kind of rallied around her, just like Pelotonia rallies around the people that need it the most, and is going through the most adversity they will ever face in their life. And the thousands of people that Pelotonia has helped overcome their obstacles and struggles. In fact, I just saw a post this week of a guy named Dwayne, and you probably know who I'm talking about. And he said, and you guys kind of did a little story on him, that Pelotonia was his Mount Everest. For him, after being diagnosed with cancer, he felt a sense of accomplishment and pride that not only did he beat cancer, but now he just rode 35 miles, and that was an accomplishment in itself. And it's really, truly incredible to have people that committed to the community you're building. Let me ask this. So for those that are struggling to find their own community, and maybe someone's listening right now to us discuss community, and they don't have a community, and it may not be geared just towards cancer, because if it's cancer, you've got to be a part of the Pelotonia community. I'm telling anyone that's listening right now that you have to be a part of that community. But maybe it's depression or anxiety or anything of those natures where you feel isolated. What would you tell them, or what would you recommend, knowing your past experiences of building that community around you? What would be some words of encouragement on how to get them to commit to a community?
Yeah, look, the reality is, and you just mentioned some of the maybe causes or situations that people find themselves in, but the reality is there are lots of people right now, even pre-pandemic, and the pandemic has just amplified it, that are struggling and lacking in hope or connectivity to a community. So easier said than done, but I guess a couple of points. One, be open to engaging in things that maybe you don't even aren't on the radar, and be open to sort of a new opportunity that might come your way. Number two is, and this will sound maybe a little cliche, but I think there's a gut feeling with opportunities that arise. Right. And if it feels good, then it's probably a good place for you to invest some time and energy. And I'm not to bring it all back to Pelotonia, but one of the things that has happened over time and was not part of the original sort of plan was that for a lot of people, they actually feel good physically. Mm-hmm. They didn't do it for that reason. They did it because of the fundraising for cancer research, or they did it because somebody asked them, but then they started to feel good. And I think we all want to feel good in whatever meaning that or whatever that meaning means to us. So, and I'll just end by this, because I listened to something this morning. I was listening to an old podcast with Michael Phelps, mm-hmm. and he was talking about one of his low points when he went to rehab. And he said, not surprisingly, the first few days there, it was like, I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want to meet anybody new. I'm not here to make friends, et cetera. And then he said one guy came up to him and said something. And he said it was just the way he said it that I heard it. And from that point on, I developed this unbelievable bond with these other people. And so it led me to your question to sort of think about, like, you never know who that person's going to be.
Right.
You never know that person who's going to say, hey, come with me to this athletic event, or come, volunteer at this food bank, or come ride Pelotonia, or come,
Mm-hmm.
And if you're open to possibilities that you might not see at this moment, there's probably a higher likelihood that you will end up in a community or multiple communities that are beneficial to you.
Yeah. Well, I don't think I've ever shared this with you. Probably because at the time I was intimidated by who you were and your success, and I had just started getting in finance, that sort of thing. So our original conversation when we had coffee and you encouraged me to sign up for Pelotonia because I've never rode in at that time. And I shared with you that my chiropractor at that time had told me that, hey, you've got to quit lifting and you got to quit running. He's like, I'll recommend that maybe you go cycle. Well, a lot of that stemmed from injuries from the Marine Corps and just wear and tear on the body, et cetera. And that resulted in lower back problems. But what you don't realize is at that time, I was going through items of PTSD because I didn't feel like like what you just said, I couldn't feel good about myself because I couldn't exercise the way I wanted to. I was told I have to do something else. So I started cycling as a hobby based off of your recommendation to do so. And what I can tell you is I've felt the best I've felt because I cycle, and that was your encouragement to do so, to join a community of Pelotonia. So Pelotonia isn't just for cancer. That is the root of what our cause is, but it helps people from all walks, all communities with whatever obstacle that they're going through. Now, when I went back to my chiropractor and told him that I was going to ride 100 miles, he said, I told you to start cycling, not endurance 100-mile cycling. He's like, that might not be good for your back. And I said, well, I'm doing it. So
that's a great story though. And it's true. And it's again, just using cycling as the example, but there's a higher barrier to entry.
Yes.
Right. So you can go out and run, anybody can go out and walk, run, whatever, but cycling, you got to have a bike. You're not comfortable at first on where to ride and safely be out there. And, so if there isn't a community, your likelihood of doing it is a lot less.
Right.
And, I always say we have a lot of fanatic cyclists in the Pelotonia community now, but they didn't start that way.
No.
So that personal well-being, it's sort of like what they say with gratitude. So I'm a big believer in expressing gratitude, and you don't do it because of the benefit you receive, but you receive a lot of benefit.
Right.
Like when I write a note to somebody, like it makes me feel good.
Exactly.
Not why I do it, but it does drive me to do it more.
Right.
And so, again, it sounds selfish. I don't mean it that way. But when you're doing something and you feel good about it, and that's what I mean for people that are searching for communities, when you find something that it just feels right, it probably is. And then the only piece of advice that I would add to it is this notion of, don't think about it in terms of you have to be in a finite number of communities.
Right.
You can be in an athletic community, and a religious community, and a philanthropic community, and a school community, and like we're all operating. We're not black and white individuals when it comes to like these sort of linear definitions of community.
Absolutely. And thank you again for, just sharing your story, being a part of the encouragement and inspiration that truly we all need in this world. And your leadership behind Pelotonia and what you guys are doing is truly remarkable. I'm proud to know you. I'm proud to have you in Columbus, and I'm proud to ride in it every single year. And just thank you so much. Eric, did you have any final thoughts or questions that you wanted to ask Doug while we got him as well?
Yeah, I'm gonna put Doug on the spot here. Doug, you and Johnny were talking about, the electronics and technology connecting people community wise. And that's a fantastic thing, right? We want that. We want that as a venue for us to be able to connect with others. But we're coming out of 2020. This is 2021. A lot of us are feeling like we've been hibernating, right? The bear is kind of shaking off the sleep. What is your encouragement or advice to people that are trying to get back into community physically, like out there? The connections with Zoom, the connections with Facebook and all these other online communities have been fine, but I know people desire face-to-face contact. And what's your encouragement to get them out the door?
It's a great question. I mean, we are all, I think, desiring that and seeking that. And whether it's hugging our family members we haven't seen, or whether it's going for walks in the community, I think we've been lulled into this sort of time period of Zoom, and that has become somewhat normal. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's going to be an adjustment period, but we have to make the effort, right? So like I had to make the effort this morning to go running with a buddy, right? Mm-hmm. I haven't seen this guy socially in months. We run every once in a while together, but it felt good to be having a conversation out on a run, and that's not something I probably did 6 months ago. Right. And so there's these sort of steps maybe that each of us can take and commit to sort of start doing some of that face-to-face interaction or mask-to-mask interaction, or, whatever is safe. But I think there's going to be a transition period of like people getting back. I was reading a study the other day that your social skills actually deteriorate when you're not in groups of people. And so there might be some awkward interactions where people aren't used to being around groups of people anymore. But I do think it'll come back in a big way as people feel comfortable sort of getting out and about.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to have to get used to wearing pants again. And that's, that's how it works for all of us right now with Zoom. All right. Johnny, thank you so much for bringing Doug on. Doug, you were a fantastic guest. Learned a lot. Johnny, do you have any closing thoughts for today's podcast?
I would just say that, if you personally are feeling like you're in isolation or lacking a sense of community, don't feel as if there isn't an option, because there's always an option. That was one of the core things that I discovered in the Marine Corps is when there's no way out, there is a way out. Mm-hmm. And I understand that in today's environment, there's a lot of our listeners who may feel that way, who may feel isolated. They're away from family members. They don't feel like they're in a community that they can belong to. I would encourage you to start thinking about, once this is over, what community should I be a part of? And maybe it is trying cycling for the first time and signing up for Pelotonia and being a part of a community for something that is so more important than ourselves. And that's my encouragement to anyone that's listening is reach out. Even if it's reaching out to our page or Pelotonia's page, we will connect you with a community. I know for a fact, if you were to message Doug on social media, A, he will respond. I know that for a fact. And B, he will attempt to try to connect you to the community or to the person that can connect you to the community. So if you're feeling as if you're in isolation, please reach out and we will include you in our own community if that's what's needed to help you get over whatever obstacles that you're facing with the adversities that you may have in your own life.
Fantastic last words. Doug, thank you again. Johnny, thank you so much for bringing Doug on. And of course, our last thank you goes to you, the listening audience. Thank you for tuning in and listening to the Elements of Success podcast with Johnny Dawson. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Johnny comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. Again, thanks for listening today. For everyone at the Elements of Success, this is Eric Johnson reminding you that this is also a community of people who believe that the elements of success are important to each one of us that are listening, and we want to continue to share those with you. So keep tuning in and share these with your communities, and then you guys have a lot to talk about. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Elements of Success podcast. If you have not subscribed to the podcast, please click the subscribe button below. If you know anyone who would benefit from listening to this podcast, click the share button.